Hello there, and welcome to the I Never Knew podcast, also known as Inc. This show dives into the life experiences of people who have been through it all and have come through the other side stronger, better, and triumphant. Each story is raw, authentic, and, at times, heartbreaking. One thing joins it all together: the fact that the stories can help the listener learn and grow. Hosted by life coach Maureen, she sits down each episode with a new guest who will empower the listener to set out on their self-discovery journey and start to heal. Now you'll be joined by Maureen and her special guest. Please enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of I Never Knew But My Dog Did podcast. So happy all of you are here today. I have a real treat for you today, and I'm going to say this: I am dedicating this to all of our combat veterans, our military veterans, and our current military service members who are serving to keep us all safe. And when you meet my new guest, my next guest, you'll understand what I'm talking about. We were just talking offline, and I said he gave me some homework to read from his book, 8 chapters, and I absolutely loved it. And I told him, I'm not going to tell you what I think about the books because I want an authentic review with the listeners listening. So listeners, I'm just going to start off by saying you need to get his book. I loved it. It's great. It's in layman's terms, but Robin doesn't know this about me. I was a military Army wife in the 90s during Desert Storm. So for me, being that he had Army, the military loves their acronyms. And so for me, it was a little easier to understand because, you just have to figure out these dang acronyms. You just start talking that way among each other, whether you're the one in the military or the family members. So guys, I'm so happy you're here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all of you listeners that have been sharing the podcast, giving these wonderful reviews, and just building this community. And so today we're building this community to include our fantastic veterans and military members. So let me tell you guys about my next guest. Robin Bartlett grew up in a military family. His grandfather, father, and brother all attended West Point. However, after 13 elementary and middle schools and 4 high schools, he decided he'd had enough of the military. But in college, as the Vietnam War escalated and 18-year-olds were being drafted daily, Bartlett joined his college's ROTC program and fell back into a familiar routine. Upon graduation as a distinguished military graduate, he volunteered for infantry, airborne, and ranger training. And assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, he got everything he asked for and more. His vivid combat experiences are brought to light in his book in a fast-moving first-person narrative that encapsulates the horror, fear, anguish, and sometimes illogical humor of that war. And we're going to talk more about his book. And again, I cannot state enough how fantastic it was. So welcome, my friend Robin. How are you today?
Thank you very much for having me, Maureen. It's great. And you know what we should do is just tell them the title of the book, which is Vietnam Combat, Firefights, and Writing History.
Yes. I'm going to have a link to that, guys, from Amazon too. So we'll have that for you. So as we do every episode, and I know you listen to a couple, we start off with that knee story. And the reason I start with the knee story is because I like listeners to hear where we've been and that I've been there, this is what I've been through, and I can give you hope too. So let's start with your knee story.
Yeah, my knee story happened about 3/4 of the way through my tour in Vietnam. I was assigned to the 1st Cav Division, Air Mobile, and we had a tremendous support from helicopters. We had more helicopters in that unit than in any other division. So we had tremendous helicopter support, not only from Huey gunships, but also Cobra helicopters, which could provide close-in fire support. And we were operating in I Corps, which is in the northernmost part of South Vietnam. And on the East Coast, it was the Gulf of Tonkin. The terrain there was tumbleweed and sand and no overhead cover, all the way to the west side, which was the Laotian border. And there you had mountainous jungles, 3 canopy jungles, 3 layers of overhead cover on top of you. So you might be out by the beach one day, and then they'd pick you up in a helicopter and fly you into the jungle. So it was very, very, and of course, different strategies and different tactics with each type of terrain. So on this particular occasion, each night we would send out ambushes. And my platoon sergeant would take it one night and I would take it the next. We would alternate. So it was my turn to take the ambush out. And we knew that the enemy was watching us on a regular basis. And so in order to kind of fool them, we would make a fuss over several different ambush locations. And on this one particular night, we did just that, and we had to cross a rice paddy in order to get to the ambush location. And the methodology for doing that was to send 2 men across the rice paddy, check out the opposite side, make sure it was clear, and then they would give you 2 little blinks on their flashlight, and then you would send your unit across. And that's exactly what we did. But the enemy must have figured out where we were going to be and what we were planning to do, because when my my unit got completely exposed, they dropped mortars right on top of us. They had us sighted in, and machine gun fire. And in the first 30 seconds, I had two men killed and 4 men wounded. And but we were walking along a rice paddy dike, which is literally concrete. I mean, it was made out of mud and dirt, but it was as hard as a rock. And we got some shelter behind the rice paddy dike. And I immediately started to call in artillery. And the first rounds came over, and I put my arm up on the rice paddy dike to see where the rounds were going to land so I could adjust them. And a mortar round went off in front of me and caught me in the shoulder and kicked me back. And I was dazed. And I got up on my knees and I was looking around, and the bullets were always going away from me. And I figured, I got turned around. And with that, another mortar round landed in front of me. And I was very fortunate because it was muddy and wet, and the mortar round went into the mud and exploded. So I got covered with all this mud and some shrapnel, which hit me in the groin. But it kicked me backwards, and I lost my helmet, and my head hit the rice paddy dike, knocked me out. So I had blood all over my shoulder and blood all over my groin, and I was out cold. And I was pulled back into the tree line by my squad leader. And because I had all this blood and I was unconscious, they put me in the dead pile. And a little while later, I woke up, but by this time I had lost a lot of blood. So I sat up and I immediately fainted. And it's about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and nobody saw me because we were still in a firefight with the enemy. The second time I woke up, I moaned, and somebody said, "Oh, hey, he's not dead." And they came over and finally put some bandages on me, but we had no way to bring in a medevac at night. So I lay on the ground from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock the next morning, in and out of consciousness. And I had a long talk with myself, and this was my knees moment. And I decided at that point in time that if I should die, I really hadn't accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, and that there was more for me to do. And that was a real turning point for me, not only in terms of my own personal beliefs in the future, but also in terms of my feelings about the war and the way we were conducting it.
Oh, wow. I love that. And I loved, reading about that in the book. I just thought, there's so much chaos going on. And, what I love so much is the camaraderie. And that's the one thing when I was a military wife, the community, just camaraderie. And reading your book, it was just everyone had each other's backs, and no matter what happened. What I love is that in the middle of war, you've got your commanders and you've got your higher ups who aren't there. And I love that there was a lot of soldiers that said, no, I have to defy sometimes these orders, because what matters most are the people that are fighting right beside me. And I think about the young men. I have a 24-year-old son, and I think about, my gosh, how young you guys were and what you were doing. And half of you didn't even make a choice. You chose to go in, and like you said, your military background with your family, and people were being drafted anyway. So you went ahead and did that and ended up being able to be an officer. But I think about these young kids that just were told they had to go. And then we're going to talk about the coming home and that reception that you guys got. What really amazed me in reading your book was how much equipment you guys had to carry for so long of a distance. Tell us about all the equipment. I couldn't believe how that would be exhausting. That would be so exhausting.
Well, and actually, we were very fortunate. Just as a quick sidebar, I was 22 years old. I was an infantry platoon leader leading 28 men. I didn't always have 28 men, but that's the group that I led. I was the second oldest in my platoon. There was one man who was 24 years old. He was the old man. And my platoon sergeant, who was supposed to be the oldest and most experienced man in the unit, was what was called an instant NCO. He had gone through a 6-month training program at Fort Benning, Georgia, and came out as a platoon sergeant. He had his 19th birthday in Vietnam. So he and I had about the same level of experience and training. But as far as equipment was concerned, our unit was very, very fortunate, because we would be taken to the battle, taken to a landing zone by helicopter. We didn't have to walk there. So this allowed us to carry more ammunition and more water, the two most important things that we carried. But yes, as a platoon leader, 2 bandoliers of ammunition, 2 gallons of water. I had 4 hand grenades. I had 4 smoke grenades. Personal effects, not so much. I mean, I had a poncho and a poncho liner and a little plastic bag with my toothbrush, which I occasionally was able to get to. You didn't carry any personal equipment. You carried what you needed, and of course some sea rations. But the nice thing was, we would, in the evenings when we dug in for our night defensive positions, we would, if a helicopter could be brought in, they would bring us additional food, additional ammunition, supplies, and water. We weren't allowed to drink any of the water from streams because of Agent Orange. Yeah. So we had to carry all of our water. And because it was extremely hot, the average temperature was 105. And then in the jungle, you would have this tremendous humidity. It might get up to 110, 115. You could go through a gallon of water in a very short time. And I had to be very cautious about my men overexerting themselves and fainting because of heat stroke or heat exhaustion. And if they fell over in the jungle, then it was extremely difficult to get them out, to get them medevaced.
I remember in one of the chapters where you were saying you guys were walking up a mountain and they were just dropping like flies. They were just the heat exhaustion. And listeners, one of the things he talks about, and I just feel like I was there with you and I couldn't stop reading. I was so just enthralled with everything the way you described it. You'd use the poncho like a tent, and that would be the only shade sometimes that you could get. Or the one thing that really fascinated me, and you mentioned, was the radio operator. How he had to carry this heavy piece of equipment, and then your machine gunners. My gosh, I mean, so tell us about those that got special assignments, or how did they fare better or worse than others?
Well, and I'm actually still in touch with my radio operator and my medic. Where my call sign in Vietnam was Foggy Day 1-6, 1 being the platoon leader of the first platoon and 6 being the leader. And my radio operator was this wiry, small, tough little guy, smaller than I was, shorter than I was. And he was just as tough, but he would complain and complain and complain about the weight that he had to carry, because he not only carried the radio, but he carried an extra battery, and plus all his regular gear, his rifle and his ammunition and everything that I carried. And finally, at one point, I got really tired of him, all these complaints, and I said, "Okay, we're at the bottom of this hill. We're gonna switch packs, and I am going to carry your pack to the top of the hill because I'm this tough ranger trained officer, and I can take this, and I'll just show you how easy it is." Well, we got to the top of that hill. We switched packs back, and I said, "I will never say another word to you about your pack." I mean, it was, and how he was able to do it, I have no idea.
Oh my gosh. I love that. That's respect. We're showing each other respect. And I love, as a leader, that you said, I'm not going to ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. And you did it. You stepped up and did it. I have to laugh because, of course, being in the military with my ex-husband in the 90s, so many of the things that you mentioned in the book carried over to it still is that today. And one of those things is the FNGs. And I'm going to let you tell the listeners what that means, because they still use that today. And I don't know if today in 2023 they do, but I know they still did when we were there in the 90s. So tell us, what is an FNG, and some good stories that you had in your book.
So an FNG is a effing new guy. And we had to be very cautious about these folks because they needed to become acclimatized to the heat. And we needed to make sure that they didn't become too squirrely if we got into a firefight. And it took them about a month or so for them to kind of settle down and feel part of the team, and to understand our protocols and the things, the way we operated. That was also part of the responsibility. But some of them, I mean, and 90% of my platoon were draftees, and some of them hadn't finished high school, and some of them had a high school education. I was the only man in the unit that had a college education. And so we, when we came into a base camp, we would be out in the field for about 4 weeks, 5 weeks. The longest I ever was out was 6 weeks before we were brought into a base camp. And then we'd spend a week in the base camp, and we could get clean clothes, get a shower, get some hot food. And it was a relatively, it was obviously a very secure base camp. There were bunkers, and we were well protected, and we would send out a patrol once a day. But otherwise, you got caught up on your sleep, and you could read paperback books, and it was light duty. So the way that the Army handled latrines was to build a two-holder, and it was in a screened-in little facility, and it was elevated, and they would take a 55-gallon drum and cut it in half, and they would put half of the drum under one hole and half of the drum under the other hole. And once a day, one of the FNGs was assigned the responsibility of pulling out the can and putting in a fresh can. And we instructed this one FNG to go to the artillery battery, which was nearby, and to get a 105 millimeter canister that was the empty round after the artillery round had been fired, and to fill it with diesel fuel. And then he would pour half of the canister into one can and half into the other can, light some matches and throw them in, and burn the refuse, burn the excrement. That was the job. And we explained it to him, and he understood it. And he went to the artillery battery and he got the canister, but he didn't read the sign that said right next to the diesel fuel was the gasoline bladder. And so he filled this canister with gasoline instead of diesel fuel. And he poured half in one canister and half in the other canister and stepped back and lit a match, and it blew all of this excrement all over the area. It set the latrine on fire. These two guys come running out of the latrine, burn down the latrine. And that poor soldier was on latrine duty, had to help the engineers rebuild the latrine. That poor soldier, he learned how to do it properly the next time.
Oh, I love that story. I love that story. The one, the thing that I really love is this story that you tell about this young man that ends up under your leadership, who was drafted supposedly illegally. And this is like Newton's law, you know, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong for this young man. And I think the listeners have to hear this story. And I know it's kind of a long you know, period, but I got such a kick out of this story. So tell us about that soldier.
So this is the chapter called The Story of Hard Luck Simmons. That's Simons. That was his name. And he joined my unit, was gung-ho. He wanted a walk point, and everything that could happen to him happened to him. On the first day out, we were actually in a base camp, and he got into some liquor and got drunk and came into me, and he was just waving back and forth. And he told me the story about how he had been illegally drafted. He was married and he was illegally drafted, shouldn't be in Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. And he got a Dear John letter from his wife because they had gotten married and they bought all his furniture and they were trying to get money from him to pay for the furniture. I mean, it was a long, involved story. And I'm saying, this guy is drunk. And we were going out to the field the next day. And as he left my tent, he fell over and fell on his mouth. And he had dentures. And he broke the teeth. He broke his teeth. And my medic, fortunately, was there and to help him out. And we took him to the battalion aid station. So in the Army, if you can't chew, if you don't have teeth, you can't go out to the field. So he had to be evacuated to the rear to have new dentures made. So he came back out about 3 or 4 weeks later, and sure enough, you know, he was gung-ho and everybody was giving him a bad time because here he'd been in Vietnam for a month and no time in the field. And it was raining. We go down a steep slope. He was leading. He said, I want to walk point. I said, okay, you walk point. He got down to the bottom of the hill and somebody dislodged a rock. And when that happens, you yell rock. And what you're supposed to do is turn your back. So if you get hit by the rock, it's going to hit you in the back. Well, he didn't do that. And the rock came down and hit him in the ankle and broke his foot. So we had to carry him back up to the top of the hill to bring in a medevac and put him up on a big boulder. And I had my steel helmet on. And I said, here, get piggyback on me and I'll take you over to the helicopter. And so he's jumping on my back and I'm kind of boosting him up. And I push my head back with my steel helmet on, smack him in the mouth and break his dentures. So now he has a broken foot and broken dentures. Back to the rear, new dentures, walking cast. And this is a long story, but to make it to kind of shorten things up, he was put on a duty of guarding a truck of beer and soda that was being brought. The truck breaks down, but he guarded and he stayed there. And they thought he was AWOL. They put him on absent without leave, and he shows up, and we finally got that settled out. And he comes out to the field again. I want to walk point. I want, and everybody's giving him a hard time because now he's been in Vietnam for 3 months and no time in the field, absolutely 0 days in the field. And he said, well, I'm going to walk point. I want to do it. I said, okay, you can walk point. So they brought out cooks to us, and they cooked, you might get breakfast at dinner time. You might get dinner at breakfast. So we had hot meals, and everybody's balancing these plates and trying to eat their food, trying to find a place to sit down. He sits down on top of a thistle and shoves it into his bottom, and they can't get the thistle out. So he has to be evacuated again. Well, I had told the battalion chaplain about this man's story because he did make a complaint, and I was obligated to tell the battalion chaplain. He said, well, the chaplain said, I'll check it out. So by this time, it's about 6 months in field, and I was an officer, only serves 6 to 7 months in the field, and then he goes to a staff job. So I was in my staff job, and my radio operator comes through. He's going on R&R, and he said, you won't believe it. Simmons came out to the field, finally, after recuperating from jungle rot and all these other things that happened to him. And he was a model soldier for about 3 days. And then, sure enough, the battalion chaplain discovered that, in fact, he was illegally drafted. And they said, you're out. You're on a plane back to the world. 3 days 6 months in Vietnam, 3 days in the field. That was it.
Oh, I love that story. If it were a movie, he'd be like that endearing, just clumsy guy that just, everybody's like, it's you again. Oh my gosh. I just loved that story.
He had a black cloud over his head wherever he went.
He did, his poor wife. And I know that the ending was that he did go back, and his wife and him got together again, and everything.
Well, he told the truth. That was the interesting thing. It was a true story.
I love it. Excuse me. So, those are really just heartwarming stories, because you guys did make the best of the situation you were put in. And I do want to touch on the seriousness and how you guys put your lives in danger for our freedom and for your country. And there was one story that you tell about how there was an enemy walking, and you had to approach him and in his life. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I actually came face to face with enemies on 3 separate occasions. One time, in Ranger School, they taught us never be without your weapon. Always have your weapon with you. And we were at a night defensive position, and it was the morning, and I had to go and relieve myself. So I walked down to the edge into the brush, just a short distance, and did my business. And I was pulling up my pants, and here, about 50 feet away, was an enemy soldier. Now, fortunately, he didn't have a weapon. He was one of those people that was tracking us and spotting us, and he waved at me, and I turned around and ran back up the hill. Another occasion was we were on a patrol, and my point man is out 50 meters in front of me, and he has a cover man, and we stopped, and they had me come forward. And as I came forward, I saw that the point man and the cover man were lying on the ground behind cover. And I'm walking up the trail like nothing's happening with my weapon in hand. And at the moment when I realized that they had heard something and that there was somebody coming up the trail, I saw this enemy soldier literally right in front of me. And the M16 rifle is just an incredible weapon. we carried 18 rounds in a magazine. We could put 20 in there, but we never wanted to suppress the spring entirely. And I flipped that selector switch to full automatic and pulled the trigger. And the weapon was designed to you really didn't aim, you just pointed. That was the whole idea. Mm-hmm. And the weapon would creep from the lower left to the upper right. It was almost as if you were to swing it. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, this enemy soldier was carrying his rifle on his shoulder. So that was another occasion in which, and then I had a third occasion where it was a night situation, and I frankly would prefer not to talk about it, but I had to kill an enemy soldier with a knife. Yeah. And that was a very traumatic experience. I prefer not to talk about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We totally understand. And I appreciate that, letting me know that, because that's just part of this thing that you guys still carry this today. And so when you came back, how long did you end up doing? Just a full 4 years, or what was your tour? How long?
No, I was a regular Army officer, and at one point in time, I was actually thinking about making it a career, as my family, all of my relatives had made it a career. My father served for 30 years, and my brother had served for a full 20 years term. And so when I came back, I was still in the military and went to my next duty station. I had requested the West Coast of the United States. And when I finally got my orders, they assigned me to Fort Wainwright. And no one knew where Fort Wainwright was. And we actually had to get a directory. This is before computers. We had to get a directory and look up Fort Wainwright, which is located in Fairbanks, Alaska. So I got my West Coast request.
I don't know about that.
I went from about 105-degree temperature. Fortunately, it was in the summertime, so it was about 65. That was about how warm it would get. But I saw 20 below and 30 below and 40 below. Very, very cold. This is right up there on the Arctic Circle. And then I was on orders to go to the career course back at Fort Benning, Georgia. And it was at that point in time that I really transitioned and made decisions that this was not how I wanted to spend my life. But I did have a final assignment at Fort Benning with the leadership department of the infantry school. And we developed a course of instruction called Leadership for Professionals. And we created a book of readings, and we did overhead transparencies and lesson plans. And we ended up training we brought in an officer and an NCO, non-commissioned officer, from every military unit in the world and trained them in this concept of leadership for professionals. So and that actually led me to my civilian profession in publishing. So that sort of set the stage for me.
I love that. I love that. I always think, your MOS, which listeners, for layman terms, is basically the career you choose in the military. And when my ex-husband, we were choosing what he would do, he was a light wheel vehicle mechanic. And so he was in the motor pool. He was in a signal brigade. It was between his 5-star general and our 5-star general going, or 4-star generals both going up for their 5-star. And literally he had his bags packed at the door. We lived in Germany, and I'm pregnant, and we were just on edge waiting for him to get that call that he'd have to go to, at the time, it was Iraq, or Afghanistan. But it's a scary thing. Military, you feel you really don't own your life. You really are, and you sign up to have them. But as they always say, we didn't assign you a family. And so the family has to really just be on board and be supportive of all of this. So what kind of advocacy do you think is really important right now for us to help veterans, to support our military members, between what your comrades, and I love the fact that you guys still talk to this day. I think that's so amazing. But the people that you served with, as well as today's military members, what do we need to do as civilians to support that and advocate for that?
So, Vietnam veterans are beginning to walk into the boots of the World War II and Korean War veterans. And those guys are getting quite old, and we are too. But the Vietnam veterans are kind of a rare breed of soldiers, and we were not welcomed home when we returned to the United States. And 68 especially, which was the year I was there, 68, 69 was at the height of the war. And that was really the turning point in the United States for protests. And it was the turning point of the general populace opinion about the war. We weren't winning. It was a stalemate. None of the soldiers wanted to die for a tie. And, none of the presidents, Johnson and Nixon, wanted to be the first president to lose a war. So that was continued and continued and continued. And consequently, many vets came back home disillusioned, and they were spit upon, not welcome. They tore their uniforms off and didn't want to have anything to do with the military. Many suffered from PTSD. Many suffered from Agent Orange. Myself included, not Agent Orange, but PTSD. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I think that would be extremely valuable for Americans to recognize is that Vietnam veterans they deserve a special greeting. I mean, it's wonderful to say to any veteran, thank you for your service. But for a Vietnam veteran, that's like saying, have a nice day. Mm. If you really want to have an impact and say something to a Vietnam veteran that will bring lumps to our throats and tears to our eyes, you say, welcome home. And you watch the reaction. It's a game changer, an absolute game changer.
Why do you think that was the reception? Was it just people's frustrations at the government and the war, that they didn't think we wanted to, they didn't think we should have been there in the first place? Why do you think it was? I feel, from what I know, and I'm a Gen Xer, so that was the time that I was born. And the millennials and the Gen Z, these generations don't understand this. I feel like maybe it was a projection of just frustration overall with the government, and the military members that were over there fighting were a product of that, or the face of that. What do you think?
Well, I think partially you're absolutely right. And I think there was also a recognition that our government was lying to us, that we were not, in fact, winning the war, and decisions were being made at the presidential level. I mean, Johnson, for example, was picking bombing targets. How in the world can you have a president of the United States picking bombing targets? That's ridiculous. And of course, the military brass, the top people, they didn't want to tell anybody that we weren't winning the war, that it was a stalemate. Yeah. Their careers were at stake. So I think there was a realization in the United States, especially as a result of all the protests that were happening on campus and throughout the major cities in the United States, that our government had lied to us, and we weren't winning the war. We weren't really losing the war. It was a stalemate. And we needed to get out because it was a lost cause. We were losing lives needlessly. There was no reason. We were never going to be able to successfully. I mean, it became so apparent when we did withdraw that the South Vietnamese army was unable to sustain the battle. They gave up. Yeah. So, and look at the country today. It's thriving.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and this domino theory of, that the communists were going to come and take over Southeast Asia. I think that was just made up so that
Fear.
I
Instill
mean,
more fear. So we
my
back
view
up.
was my view was on the ground. I didn't even have a 50,000-foot view or a 50-foot view. I had a boots on the ground view. So
Yeah, and that to me is the only one that mattered because you were the one out there, putting your life on the line where the others were just sitting there. There is a documentarian, I know you're familiar. His last name is Burns, and he does these documentaries on the wars. And I watched the one on Vietnam, and I thought it was really, really well done. And I learned so much about what you're saying about the lies and the things that were being said, the cover up, because the government, the higher ups, the president, they wanted to look like they were so powerful to get reelected, as well as trying to get money to support this war. And so I think what do you think about the documentary? Did you see the documentary?
of course, sure. And in talking with many vets about the Ken Burns documentary, many of them feel like he gave a lot of weight to the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong points of view, but rightfully so in many respects, because what did we ever learn or hear about their side of the story? What did we ever know about it? Very, very little. So while many Vietnam vets come away feeling negative about Ken Burns in that documentary, I think it was important to tell both sides of the story, and I think he did it as well as he could. I feel like it is a relatively fair statement about what happened during that entire time, and especially during that 1968 period of time when everything shifted. I think he really tells the truth there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for me, it was more the footage that I saw that kind of, because I'm one of these, I don't listen to somebody else's opinion, but I make my own, and I need to gather all the facts. And I think Ken Burns documentaries help me gather facts to make up my own mind. So I think that's fantastic. And understanding that veterans who have watched it are like, yeah, but they don't understand.
I tried to get him to review my book. He was too busy.
Oh man, keep trying. That would be fantastic. I think he needs to read that. So I just love all of that. And I just am so grateful for your take on that. And I think the newer generations need to know where our history was and what was done for them to be able to have this. I don't think and this is just me sort of being on a soapbox, and I want to know if you agree with me. I just don't feel like our younger generation right now quite understands all that has come before to get to this place where they have freedom of speech and sexuality and freedom of expression and all those things. Do you agree with me, or what do you think?
I do. I definitely agree with you. I put 3 sons through high school and college educations. One went on, got a PhD, and my oldest is a very, very bright kid and a very bright young man, and very smart. I have on many occasions talked with him about the war, and he has a wonderful understanding of it. He's come away with a tremendous knowledge. Smart. It's amazing what happens when you discover your son is smarter than you are. Although I think I have more street smarts than he has.
Yes, but, a lot more life experience. We know
a little more life experience. Although he's catching up on that. I have 2 grandchildren now, so he's catching up on that very quickly. But my sons, 2 of them studied history in particular, and concentrated on many aspects of American history, and they came away extremely knowledgeable. It's wonderful to sit at the dinner table on occasion and listen to them banter back and forth about listing all the presidents of the United States, and having the younger one tell the older one that he missed one. And so my sons, none of whom have served in the military, by the way, my sons, they do have a good understanding of the wars that we've been in and of American history, but I don't think our schools these days are training that, are communicating that or teaching that. And unfortunately, we're probably going to repeat many of the same mistakes that we've had them in the past.
I would completely agree with you. And I am now raising my 15-year-old grandson. And he actually is fascinated with history. And so whenever we go do stuff, he wants to go to a museum or a library, which I'm so thrilled, because that really wasn't the thing with my son. So this is kind of cool that I get kind of this do-over. And
You're too young to have a grandson.
15, and I got another one on the way. I've got 3 and one more on the way in August. Still cooking right now. So I all of it is just fantastic. What I want to know is, if people want to help donate to veterans, what is your favorite charity for them to donate to? And how can we get a hold of you and your book and all that stuff? This is your commercial right now. Take it away.
So I think the organization in the United States that is doing the best job of working with veterans, of regardless of what wars they might have been in, is the American Legion.
Okay.
And I have high regard for that operation, for this, and I'm a member of the American Legion. I'm also the president of the New York, New Jersey chapter of the 1st Cav Division. So that's a smaller group of just soldiers who were associated with the 1st Cav Division. That's the division with the big yellow patch and the horse head on it. It's the biggest patch in the Army. So a very proud group. Another organization that I am extremely committed to is the VVMS, Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, which is the fund that built the wall. And Jan Scruggs, who was the founder of that organization and had the original idea for the wall, is actually wrote a wonderful review for my book, and it's published in the book. The book is available online from Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. It's in many bookstores. Again, the title is Vietnam Combat, Firefights and Writing History. And if you come to my website, which is robinbartlettauthor.com, you can get an autographed copy with free shipping and save $13 off the cover price.
Hey, that's a good deal. I mean, you guys, you really, really do need to get that book and get an authorized. I mean, get an
autograph. Yep.
Autographed. Because to be honest, as authors, we'll be honest with you, when you do Amazon and Barnes and Noble, we only get about half of our book price. So anytime we can go directly to the author themselves, I encourage that. So I've just so appreciated this, and we're going to end it with, I want to know, what do you know now that you didn't know then? So what is it you never knew that now you live every single day really trying to emanate?
Well, I lost a lot of myself as a result of that war. I lost a lot of empathy. My wife tells me that my greatest strength is that I am fearless, and my greatest weakness is that I am fearless. And a lot of that comes from the training and comes from that experience that I had. And it's taken me a long time to try to work on regaining that empathy and doing something as simple as saying to my sons, I love you. That's been very difficult for me to adjust to and to come back to, be the person I was before. It's a long road. Once you've experienced, it's the same sort of thing I think that many firefighters and police experience and emergency room people have to, once you go through some of those traumatic experiences, it affects you, and you tend to bottle it up and keep it inside.
I agree with you 1,000,000%. I worked in an emergency room trauma center in the center of Phoenix. And what it is it's a survival mode for us to sort of numb that, for, you can't feel everything or it will overwhelm you and you'll just curl up in the fetal position and can't deal with it. So I was actually going to say, that is very common with our first responders, because you see traumatic things that involve humans every day. There's loss, there's trauma, and the degrees that you see in those careers is something that those who are not in those careers can possibly even fathom. And I know we became this tight-knit group, just like military. You become this group and you rely on each other for support. And I think that's another aspect is any of our veterans out there who are experiencing PTSD and you're not in any kind of support group, I really, really want you to get into some sort of support group and talk about it and be able to share those experiences with others who have been there. And we care about you. And suicide among veterans is among the highest. And we don't want to see that because we are so appreciative. Welcome home to our Vietnam vets. And thank you for your service to all the other members. Please, please, please reach out. And there's now so many more resources for mental health care. And being a mental health care provider myself, I can get you in touch with the places that you need to go to be safe. Listeners, if you want to donate, I'm going to look up the links to donate to the American Legion and possibly the specific one that my friend Robin is a part of, as well as the VVMS. So let's donate, let's help, let's support, let's do everything we can to say thank you to our veterans. I can't thank you enough for being here. It's been such a pleasure. And like I said to you off air, I can't wait for my husband to read it. The book is so easy and fun to read. You feel as if we're walking right beside Robin and his crew through what you went through. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. So
thank you, Maureen. It's been a pleasure to be here. And I have a lot of resources and information on my website too. So, and you can read a free chapter too. Get at robinbartlettauthor.com. That's the place to go.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, you get to read a chapter, and he has all of those resources as well. So he's probably a much better resource than I am. You can skip over me and then get to him. But thank you, listeners, for being here today. Thank you for always building the community and supporting all of the guests that I do have. Thank you for the just the love that you send to one another, the kindness and the acceptance of being open-minded to each other. And ultimately, all we need to do is just show kindness to each other. So if you need any life coaching, dating coaching, relationship coaching, confidence coaching, trauma coaching, I'm here for you. Life Coach Maureen. My books as well, Amazon.com. My dog is more enlightened than I am. My dog is my relationship coach. And please, please go buy some healthy, natural treats for your puppies at mydogiseverything.net. And we will talk to you next week. Please adopt, don't shop. And that includes kitties too, because I tend to leave the furry meow kitties out. And I love all animals. So we're including kitties in this week as well. So thank you all for listening. Until next week, we will talk to you later.
Thank you for tuning in to the I Never Knew podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and educational, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and spread the word. The more people that join the Inc. community, the more it can develop and influence others as we work together for a healthier and brighter future. Until next time.